In keeping with the rhythm of the Torah reading in the diaspora, we are doing Parshas Naso tonight. So for those in Israel, I apologize that we are a week behind and will remain that way for a few more weeks into the summer. But never fear, because we've got fascinating material, and even those who already read Parshas Naso last week, well worth your while to join us all the same. Okay, I'm just looking for my notes and we'll get cracking. We read today, this week, rather, as we just said right now, Parshas Naso. Parshas Naso is dominated by several high-profile subjects. The one that occupies the most space is the offerings of the Nesiim, 89 verses at the end of the Parasha are occupied with that. We won't have time to deal with that in our discussion tonight. Let's say, more captivating subjects and more intriguing, perhaps, is the Parsha of the Sota, the suspected adulteress, and the Nazir, the Nazirite, the one who takes the vow to abstain from wine, to distance himself from death, and to not cut his hair. And as I said, much has been written about those fascinating subjects. What I want to share with you tonight, though, is something a bit different. Uh, Abarbanel, well, a bit related. Abarbanel has a fascinating and very impressive, policy in which he does not accept the suggestion that the topics taken up in the Torah are out of order chronologically, nor that they are arranged in a kind of, I won't say even haphazard, certainly not haphazard, but in a sequence which has no evident explanation, no evident sort of thread that runs through it. Many of the commentaries simply acknowledge that the Torah is written in accordance with a product of divine wisdom that does not always accord with our expected presentation of subjects in a logical manner and also in a chronological order, that the subjects taken up in the Torah, including the narrative, almost historical events, do not always follow the chronological order in which they occur. Abarbanel rejects that. Abarbanel exercises great determination, ingenuity, creativity, and usually comes up with an explanation which is actually quite satisfying in explaining them. Now, our parsha is an example of this. The parsha ends with the Nesiim, as we mentioned. Well, according to Rashi, this all happened on the 8th day of the inauguration, which was the first day of the role of Aharon and his sons. It took place on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Abarbanel quotes the Midrashic tradition that 10 events happen on that day that were very notable. First events happen on that day. Abarbanel says it doesn't make sense that an event which happened on the beginning of Nisan should be recorded subsequent to the beginning of Iyar, because the book of Bamidbar that we are reading now, the book of Bamidbar begins with the events that happened on the first day of the second month. The census was the beginning of Iyar. And it doesn't make sense that the Torah should include an extended passage regarding something which happened a month earlier. And he proves his point in a number of sophisticated ways, which we won't dwell on right now. Besides which, it doesn't belong in the book of Bamidbar, it belongs in the book of Vayikra, at the time of the description of the inauguration, which, as you remember, includes the tragic death of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron. That's when this should have been mentioned, or immediately after. It doesn't belong here in Bamidbar. The same comment, though, the same approach he raises regarding the other events in our Torah reading, in our Parsha. The Parsha begins or going back to even last week's Sedra, where we have the census, we have the arrangement of the tribes of Israel in accordance with their location within the encampment, in which the Mishkan itself is in the midst of the camp. The Leviim dwell in its circumference, and each of the other 12 tribes dwell 3 per wing in the 4 wings, the 4 directions of the camp. That was in last week's parsha. Then the Torah goes on to tell us more about the Leviim, which we learn about in more detail in terms of the numbers and the various roles that were assigned to each of the three sub-tribes. And that subject continues into the beginning of our parsha. Naso es Rosh Naso es Rosh B'nai Gershon Ganheim. So we have the conclusion of the role of the Levium, and then we have apparently unrelated subjects. We have, says Abravanel, actually, let me put it in the positive. Let me explain how Abravanel sheds light on the logic behind the order. So first we have the census of the people, how many in each tribe. Then we have the arrangement of the urban planning for the encampment in the wilderness. Then we have the position of the Levim who were encamped around the Mishkan, which was in the center of the camp, as well as their responsibilities. And those responsibilities, of course, included uh, the dismantling and the transportation of the Mishkan as well. So it's all very logical. Then we have in our Sedra, after the conclusion of the rest of the role of the Levium, we have a short passage about Shiluach min HaMachaneh, sending out of the camp temporarily three people who are in a state of ritual impurity. The Tsarua, the one who has Tsaras, who's smitten with this condition similar to leprosy. We have the Zav, the person who experiences a form of discharge, which also renders him Tameh, ritually impure. And then we have the one who's Tameh Nefesh, the one who is impure because of contact with the dead. And they're not identical in the sense that their banishment from the camp is not equal, but each one is required to distance himself in various ways. Says Abravanel, this makes sense because now that we know where all of the Jewish people are supposed to be positioned, we can now sort of purify the camp and say there are certain people who, because of their circumstances, by the way, male or female, men or women, who have to be distanced from the camp temporarily. Okay, so those are the three people, the three categories. Then we have Gezel Hager, which is again a short passage. By the way, if you want to know where, just to follow, I mean, I'm reviewing uh, aspects of the Sedra which are quite well known, but if you would like to take a look, you can see for yourself in the Art Scroll Chumash at the beginning of chapter 5, page 750. And then a few verses later on the following page 752, now here Rashi explains, and Abravanel goes along with that the Torah here is alluding to a particular type of transgression, a particular instance of theft, and that is a person who steals from a ger, a person who steals from someone who is a proselyte. So, of course, a proselyte is a member of the Jewish people, and the same prohibition of theft is applicable to him as to any other Jew, and for that matter, it's prohibited in any case, even for to steal from any person. And as a member of the Jewish people, of course, one would not expect to have any special or different status for the theft of a ger, something stolen from a proselyte, compared to something stolen from a Yisrael or a Levi or a Kohen. However, a person might think, we've arranged the camp and everyone has his place. The Leviim, the tribe of Ruvain, the tribe of Yehuda, the Gerim, they have no place because they're not from any particular tribe. So where do they encamp? Okay, that's an interesting question which the Meforshim take up, although Abravanel doesn't address that. But the point is that they do not occupy the space. They don't have an allocated space in which to pitch their tent within the tribe of Gad or the tribe of Reuven or the tribe of Dan or the tribe of Zvulun or any other tribe. And by the way, when they entered the land of Israel, also the land was divvied up according to the tribes, but the Gerim, the proselytes, had no place to live. They could live where they choose to live or they want to live. They can live where they choose. The Torah doesn't forbid them from living in any particulars, but they don't have a homestead. They don't have an allocation. They don't have an ancestral uh, tract of land where they and their descendants can live and can work the land, etc. So therefore, says Abarbanel, I believe the other Mefarshim say this as well, a person might think that if that their property rights are not sacrosanct, because after all, um, if I steal from him and he dies in the fullness of time, or maybe if a person steals from an elderly or infirm proselyte, you'll think when he dies, he's got no heirs. Oh, perhaps he does. Perhaps he's married, has a wife and children. But what if he doesn't? So every member of the Jewish people who is a born member of the Jewish people has relatives by definition. This is the Jewish tribe, the Jewish family. But someone who is a Ger Tzedek, although his status as a Jew is uh, completely validated and upheld, but he has no heirs, unless, as I said, he's married, etc. But if not, then he perhaps has. So therefore, this is the reason why this passage is introduced here, because we have just, again, established which tribe resides where. We've excluded those particular people who temporarily are forced to live outside the camp. Then we have, what about the one who has no place in the camp at all? So the Torah upholds and emphasizes the integrity and the property rights of that Ger Tzedek, and speaks about the consequences of one who steals from him. But here's where it gets interesting, because it's very difficult to explain the next passage, and that is one of the fascinating passages which we mentioned earlier. And that is here at the beginning of chapter, or not in the beginning even, but in chapter 5, where the Torah says, starting in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, page 752, the last line, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amart aleim ish ish ki siste ishto. Every man whose wife goes astray and commits treachery. We're speaking here about a suspected adulteress. What does that have to do with what preceded it? So up until now, I know we've lavished about 10 minutes of our introduction, it's right. But until now, there's a logic which Abarbanel has presented. But how can we explain the subject of the sota, which would have its natural place in the book of Vayikra? It would have its natural place within the subject matter of the sort of uh, consequences of sexual immorality, which we had in the portion of Achremos and in the portion of Kedoshim. These are all in the book of Vayikra, because the woman is brought to the temple or the Mishkan and goes before the Kohen and brings an offering. This is naturally to be positioned in Torah's Kohanim, that is to say, the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Why is it here? And why is it here in particular, following what we've just explained about the arrangement of the camp? Says Abarbanel something very logical. He says, the camp is now pure. The camp is now like, I want to say pure, it's a slightly tinged, politically incorrect expression. The camp is refined. The tribes are living where they are designated. They are working in a harmonious manner because the Jewish people are united. And of course, they're going to enter the land of Israel very soon, according to the expectation. What about a man who questions if his children are really his? If he questions whether the child, or maybe more than one, that his wife has born, perhaps is the product of some other relationship, or who knows, other relationships. Who knows? So that's why Abarbanel says the Parsha of Sota is here, because the Sota is the woman suspected of adultery, and the means by which a suspicion of adultery is allayed is consistent with the theme of our Sedra and the theme of the book of Bamidbar, which is all about the yichus, the pedigree, identifying who are the parents, or for that matter, the antecedents of every individual. Which tribe is he from? Which tribe is she from? Even though a woman who is married would naturally be associated with the tribe of her husband, but a woman who's not married. So the Torah has turned its attention to the identity and also the forebears of each of the 600,000 members of the Jewish people. That's just as a shorthand. The numbers are really a bit more, of course. And therefore, the Torah says, okay, we need to talk about the sota then. There is a means by which, if a person does have such a suspicion, such a kind of his uh, not his conscience here, but his sense of stability and integrity and what would be called uh, transparency. He feels there's something amiss here. So there's a method of the sota. There's a process by which the status of his wife, insofar as her marital fidelity, can be established. It's not the time to go into more detail about the sota and all of that. We'll save that for another time. Right now, I want to address the sequence of events, the sequence, not so much of events, but the sequence of subjects. Now, Shalom Bayis reigns supreme. The Jewish people are living among their cousins. Each tribe is living with the members of the extended tribe, and they have their place, they have their position within the nation, and the status and the worthiness of all of the members of the Jewish people has been established and validated. And even the instance of marital infidelity or suspicion of infidelity has been addressed as well. This is great. Yisraelim, Leviim, Kohanim, everybody has his place. They're all miyuchasim, that is to say, their pedigree has been established. They're all residing in the location, in the position within the camp where they belong. Says Abarbanel, what about the next parsha in the Torah, meaning the next subject which is taken up in our Torah reading in the Sidra of Naso? After the Sota, we have curiously the Nazir. The Nazir is not a product of suspicion of infidelity or the actuality of infidelity. The Nazir is a situation which a person can choose to take upon himself. And if he chooses to take upon himself the vow of the Nazir, so the Torah describes certain implications. Why is the Sot and the Nazir, why are they juxtaposed? So I'm sure you know that the famous explanation of Rashi is frequently decided that a person who observes the degradation of the sota, who sees the consequences of her unworthy behavior, and especially if she is not just unworthy, but she's guilty of adultery, then she dies a gruesome death. Anyone who witnesses that, Yazir atzmo min hayayin, he will forswear wine, because he'll see this is the consequence of behavior which is unrestrained, maybe further lubricated by alcohol, by wine consumption. So therefore, Yazir atzmo min hayayin. And Rashi says that's the relationship between them. Abarbanel is not convinced by that. He says, firstly, we know that a woman can be a Nazirah as well. That's certainly true. It says Isha Isha. Let's take a look. So you don't have to take my word for it. If you're with me in the art scroll, so on page 758, the beginning of chapter 6, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta ish o isha ki aflidin dor neder nazir lazir l'Hashem, a man or a woman. But says Abarbanel, this sota, she found herself, I don't want to be too needlessly graphic, she found herself in the wrong place, in the wrong company, in seclusion, because she was drinking, not because he was drinking. If the man was drinking, if her paramour was drinking and overcome with illicit thoughts, but she's at home in her own space, no misadventure will follow. The woman is the adulteress. So therefore, it takes two to tango. But if she was not drunk, then it wouldn't have come to this. So Rashi says, yeah, that's what I mean. But then it should have said that this vow of the Nazir is not going to help for his wife. If he takes the vow of the Nazir, so he doesn't drink wine. But if his wife does, and she is unrestrained in her behavior as a result, So yes, Nazir, Nazirah, they both go together. But in terms of the lesson to be derived from the loose behavior of the adulteress, it's pertinent to the woman, not the man. Besides which, says Abravanel, um, let's see in my notes here. Yeah, the Torah could have said that a man, I mean, Rashi should have said that a woman who sees the sot in her degradation will take the vow of the Nizirah so as not to fall into that pattern of behavior, or a man could impose the vow of the Nizirah on his wife, which can happen as well, only if the woman or another person accepts it. There's a whole discussion in the Mishnah in Masechta Nazir. If a person says, I'm a Nazir, and the other one says, me too, then the second one also becomes a Nazir. Or if a person says, we're all Nazirim, so if the other listeners give their assent, then the vow of the Nazir is applicable to the other person, but not against the will of the other person. Uh, there's another thing here as well, though. According to Rashi, the Nazir is mentioned here after the Sota only as a precautionary measure. Only like a person who feels that he is weak, morally weak, so he'll take the vow of the Nazir. And this is consistent with the approach that the Nazir really is not to be admired so much. The famous statement, which Rashi also mentions, Rabbi Elizabeth HaKapar says that a person who takes the vow of the Nazir has sinned against his soul by depriving himself of wine. Then there's another opinion that a person who is the vow of the Nazir is called holy. Is he called a sinner or is he called holy? So we have both opinions. Abravanel comes down on the side that he's called holy and he's to be praised, he's to be admired, and therefore Abravanel doesn't want to see the Nazir as just on the rebound from the Sota, the way Rashi does. If that's the case, why is it here? So here's a brilliant approach of Ramban of Abravanel. Actually, is found in a similar idea is found in Ramban because Ramban says that the reason the Nazir is called a chote, a sinner, when he brings the korban at the end of his interval of his Nazarite status, which is 30 days, can be longer, but the default is 30 days. The reason he's called a sinner, according to Rashi, is that he's deprived himself of wine, and that's not an ideal. According to Ramban, he's called a sinner because he has not extended his status as a Nazir. The Torah says that after he's brought his offering, then he can drink wine. Says Ramban, why should he drink wine? He should extend, he should perpetuate his status as a Nazir. It's like a person says, Malin Bakodesh. We seek to ascend in holiness, not to descend. So if he took the vow of the Nazir for 30 days, he should renew it, he should extend it. Says Abravanel, a slightly different approach, though. Well, okay, that's how Ramban understands it. Abravanel agrees with that, although I'd like to add something further. But just to put it in the context of the sequence. So after the Sota, we have the Nazir, says Abravanel. The Sota is a way, the ritual of the Sota is a way of resolving a situation of marital suspicion, which is very good. But after we now have the Jewish people, each in their place, the Yisraelim, the Levim, and the Kohanim, and we have ensured that there's no uncertainty about pedigree, there are no mamzerim, no people of illegitimate birth whose origins have been overlooked, even though it could still happen. But the purpose of the Sota is to try to address that problem. Says Abravanel, there's some category of person who is higher than Yisrael, higher than a Levi, higher than a Kohen, and that is a Nazir. And that is not something which comes upon a person by birth, but by choice. That is a form of sanctity, a form of religious achievement or aspiration, which is the product of the free will of every individual. So the sota is a way of resolving the uncertainty and the suspicion of, as I said before, like ensuring that the identity of every person has been confirmed in terms of his um, pedigree. But says Rambam, says Abarbanel, now that we have achieved that, the Torah says, you know what? There's someone higher than all of those. And that is the sacred one who is the Nazir, who takes the vow of the Nazirite. According to Abarbanel, this is why he's called a sinner. At the end, when he ditches his Nazir status and it goes back to how he was, it's like backsliding. So Abravanel, I'm not saying that he would encourage every person to be a Nazir. I mean, he himself was not a Nazir. I've read quite a lot about him. He was not a Nazir, and the status, the existence of Nazirim has not been common. Probably even in antiquity was not common. Certainly, it's not been common for many, many centuries. By the way, it's not unknown, but certainly not common. But nevertheless, philosophically, Abravanel lauds the one who is the Nazir. Okay, our time is short, so I want to tell you, I think, a very beautiful, novel idea that Abravanel says regarding the Nazir at the very end of the description of the Nazir. And that is found, if you're with me in the article on page 762, verse 21, Pasuk Chaf. So, having described the Nazir who takes the vow of the Nazirite, and he's restricted in the ways that we've discussed and are well known, and mentioning the possibility of someone who becomes ritually impure, suddenly, a Nazir becomes ritually impure through contact with the dead unexpectedly, suddenly, which can happen because he may find himself unexpectedly in the proximity of a corpse or whatever it might be. And he has to bring an offering, and then the days that he undertook the vow are reset. And then the Torah finally deals with the conventional case. He took a vow for 30 days or for perhaps a longer in time interval. And the Torah describes how he then, at the end of those days, he can cut his hair and he brings a certain offering. And then the Torah says, take a look, Zos Toras HaNazir, Asher Yidor Korbanol Hashem Al Nizro. This is the law of the Nazarite, who shall pledge his offering to Hashem for his abstinence, milvad asher tasig yado, aside from what he can afford, kifi nidra asher yidor, in accordance with the vow that he shall pledge, ken yasal toras nizros, so shall he do in addition to the law of his abstinence. According to Rashi, the Torah prescribes the offering for a Nazir at the end of his status of his interval of Nazirus. Says this final pasuk in the Torah, this is what he should bring in addition to whatever he chooses to bring voluntarily. And there's a profundity here to this as well, because the whole idea of being a Nazir is something that a person chooses to do. The Torah does not impose it upon him, not upon me, not upon you, not upon any particular individual. It's something which is an expression of a desire either for self-abnegation or for aspiration of higher spiritual achievement, or because of a desire to atone, or maybe because of a weakness which a person recognizes in himself. He's too vain, or he's too fond of the bottle, and therefore, as a corrective measure, he will do these things. Or, like we said in the famous comment of Rashi, if a person feels that he is, when he gets intoxicated, his behavior and his standards of personal modesty and comportment are compromised, so he takes the vow of the Nazir. Those are all good reasons. But the point is, or they're maybe not the ideal reason, but those are valid reasons. The point is, each man or woman becomes a Nazir because he chooses to do so. If that's the case, the standardization of it, the institutionalization of the Nazir, where each one has to bring the same offering and the same processing of the hair and the same details, it's kind of inconsistent with the whole idea that this is a personalized choice. If it's a personalized choice, then why are we all the same? Therefore, the Torah says, that this is probably perhaps what Rashi means. Therefore, the Torah says that yes, this is what is prescribed, but a Nazir who has the means and who has the inclination will bring additional offerings as well. That's how Rashi explains it. Says Abarbanel something more subtle and I think very beautiful. He says, Milvad asher tasig yado, besides what his hand can reach. It doesn't mean his finances. It doesn't mean that he can bring another lamb or another goat. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean he'll bring another measure of flour or another measure of oil. It means if this is for the law, the statutory law for the Nazir who takes the vow, and he, by doing so, or she abstains from three things: from cutting his hair, from contact with the dead, and from drinking wine or any other grape derivative, says Abarbanel, this is the standard, this is the basic, this is the statutory institution of Nazirus. But a person who genuinely aspires to spiritual achievement, he'll do more. He won't just adjure himself from those things, but he may also, says Abarbanel, for example, he may forswear marital relations if his wife agrees. He might forswear other types of indulgence. Maybe he'll do away for a certain period of time with eating meat or other types of indulgent behavior that a person may feel as if my Yetzer Hara is sort of like um, ambushing me. I'm going to take a vow to parlay the blandishments of the Yetzer Hara. That's Asher Tasig Yado. Abravanel puts it this way: to the extent that the hand of his Yetzer Tov overpowers the hand of his Yetzer Hara. That's milvad asher tasig yado. It doesn't refer just to the offering that he brings when he comes to the Mishkan. It refers to the extent of the Nazirus that he will undertake beyond the statutory. But it refers to milvad asher tasig yado, which he personally chooses. There's a different versions of this story, but I heard in yeshiva, I heard this story many years ago about the Alter of Slobodka, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, one of the great Musar personalities of our times. He died in the early 1900s, and he was the grandfather, or possibly great-grandfather, of Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the late Rosh Yeshiva Meir. I think the grandson, possibly. In any case, who had the same name. The Alter of Slobodka apparently had a fondness for smoked meat. So he was fond of it. And apparently, on one occasion, when he was a young man, maybe even a teenager, he was walking in the shuk and he smelled the aroma of smoked meat, of salami, or something that was highly seasoned. And it was so aromatic, maybe not as a perfume, but he was very beguiling, very alluring. And because he felt as if he was like almost losing control in his craving to have some of that meat. It was kosher meat, but even so, felt he's not in control fully of his behavior and of his conduct and of his eating. Just parenthetically, but it's the same idea. It is said that when his wife would serve him dessert or something very tasty, he would eat a small amount of it. He would thank her wholeheartedly and compliment her, and then he would distance himself from it, so as not to eat in a way or eat food which is just for the pleasure, just for the sort of sensation of the culinary delight. So in a similar way, and he felt that he was almost like too fond of it, and he took a vow. This is a version I heard in yeshiva. He took a vow not to eat salami or smoked meat for 50 years. And they say that towards the end of his life, when he was probably, let's say, in his I don't know, late 60s or 70s, as a mature man, he felt that after 50 years of self-control, he was now able to eat a small amount or an appropriate amount of smoked meat and he'll do it l'shem shemayim. Maybe he'll eat it on Shabbos or whatever it might be. And slightly by that time, possibly though the nitrates were not good for his blood level. But in any case, as a elderly person, but in any case, that's what they said. There's another version to say that he wouldn't eat it because the flavoring and the spices make it very tasty, but the nutritive value he can derive without that indulgence. Okay, our time is just about up and over time, but I want to very briefly explain what about the next parsha, the next passage in the Torah? In here, I don't mean the next sequence of the weeks, but in the Sedra of Naso, what is the next subject that is taken up? This is a short passage, a very beloved passage, very important passage, a very well-known passage, and that is Birchas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. Why is it here? So again, Abarbanel says it shouldn't be here. It should be in Parsha in the book of Vayikra. That's the laws of the Kohanim. Besides which, according to Rashi, the when Aharon blessed the people in Parsha Shmini, he blessed them with Birchas Kohanim. Well, if that's the case, why is Birchas Kohanim only recorded here in the Torah in the next book, the book of Bamidbar? So of course one can say in Mukdam U'Mu'achar that it's mentioned here, but it was really given there. Okay, but Abarbanel, I told you already, doesn't go for that at all. Spends a very beautiful day, and we'll end with this. He says, the encampment is fantastic. The Jewish people, each one is in the right place. Each Shevet, each tribe has its correct neighbors in the right direction, northwest, east, south. The Leviim are in the middle. Moshe and Aharon are encamping in immediate proximity to the Mishkan. We have the Leviim, we have the Kohanim, we have gotten, we've distanced those who are Tomei. We have resolved the scenario where a person is uncertain about the pedigree of people maybe in his own family, because we've resolved that through the Sota. We even have the holiness of the Nazir. So the Jewish people is flying high. That is when the Ayin Hara gets involved. It's exactly that status that Al says git, when you feel that things are so fantastic, not only physically or materially, because of course they had the manna from heaven and all of that good things, but spiritually as well. But that scenario where the Jewish people are just as they should be is a dangerous position. That's when the Ayin Hara can set in. And of course, that is exactly what Bilam tried to exploit. We'll read about it in a few weeks' time. So says Abarbanel, that is why Birchas Kohanim is mentioned here, because now we need Birchas Kohanim. It's because of the accomplishments of the Jewish people. It's because of our spiritual vigor that we are equally at risk of the Ayin Hara, the evil eye, which we don't have time to explain in detail what that means, but this is the notion, like we say, Al Tiftach Pele Satan. If things are so good, then they are at risk of turning south. Like when you're very high, there's nowhere to go but down. That's why we have Birchas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. The three verses correspond to Yisrael, Levi, and Kohen. And Abarbanel explains from the exact words of each of those verses how they are associated with those three categories. And we don't have time to go into that. I just add that this notion that Birchas Kohanim has as a primary function the parrying or the distancing or the neutralization of the Ayin Hara, we have an echo of that even to this very day. For those who were in Shul on Shavuos, we heard Birchas Kohanim. At Musaf, of course, in the land of Israel, they have Birchas Kohanim every day. And many, Sephardim do it in the diaspora every day, or some do every Shabbos. But certainly on the festivals, we do Birchas Kohanim. I'm sure you are aware that in your Siddur, or better yet, your Machzor, you will find a prayer which every person who listens to Birchas Kohanim can recite, a prayer in which he says, my dreams are not within my control. They may reflect, I'm paraphrasing, an ominous foreshadowing of my future, experiences, or maybe that of someone close to me. And a person can say, I had a dream. I don't know what it's about, what it means. I'm worried that it may be foreboding, and therefore may the words of Birchas Kohanim ameliorate the dream. May they neutralize the dream. May they transform the dream from an omen of uh, misfortune to that which is only beneficial of health, of life, of blessing, of achievement, and all the things to which we aspire. So the idea that the Birchas Kohanim is the like positioned here against the Ayin Hara, we find that in our own liturgy to this day, because if a person has a dream and he's worried about what the dream portends, then by reciting this particular prayer, and the Gemara mentions it already. It's not just a medieval or modern idea. The Talmud already mentions a person who has a dream and he's troubled by it. At the time of Birchas Kohanim, that is the time to, so to speak, bring to the fore or bring to mind the dream that you have beheld, and to pray that Hashem will neutralize the dream, or better yet, transform it to blessing, achievement, good health, and success in all that we do. I'm sorry we've gone over a few minutes, but I think it's a fascinating Sedra with some novel ideas from our friend for the year, Don Yitzhak Abravanel.